Hey everyone, I wanted to make a short video. It's about, I guess it's about a month into the official quarantine of the pandemic, COVID-19 right now. And there's been a lot of talk recently from our government about, um, there's a benefit program called CERB, which is sort of like, I've been calling it sort of basic income light, because it's a boiled down version of the universal basic income, and it's a bit narrow in its scope, and it's very conditional, not unconditional, like the basic income has been sort of talked about so far in a lot of circles. And I just want to make a short video to invite you, especially if you're an artist or creative or musician in any kind. I would love to hear your perspective on what you would do if there was an actual universal basic income. So not just during pandemic time, I just mean in general. So, hopefully you've heard about what the universal basic income is. Basically, it's an unconditional stipend that you would get every month to put towards whatever you want, no questions asked. And there's all kinds of different amounts. Some countries have been proposing this increasingly as automation becomes a big thing in a lot of workplaces. But also just in general, I'm just curious of everyone's perspective of universal basic income. There's been a lot of talk about it. Andrew Yang in particular, the presidential candidate in the States, was really big on the idea, and there's been a lot of other proponents of the idea of the universal basic income. And so I wanted to make a video about some of my ideas, because I think about it all the time, and how specifically for artists, what it would mean to have a universal basic income, and some of the things that might begin to appear in society as a result of, I guess, not having to worry about paying your bills so much. Even though a lot of the basic incomes that have been proposed in terms of the actual dollar amounts have not been enough to really cover the full expenses of living today, especially if you're living in the Southern Ontario region, among other places, expensive places on the planet like San Francisco and LA. There's a lot of, really expensive places that $1,000 a month wouldn't really make much of a dent. But even if it was $1,000 or $1,500 or $2,000, somewhere in that range, that's sort of what I'm brainstorming with in this video for sort of imagining what could happen as a result of having that. One thing that I found as an artist is that I do a lot of different things. The most consistent bread and butter thing that I do for my career, or I guess the best return on investment, you could say, in terms of the time that I put in versus what I get out. My highest paying thing is my animation, which I do for all range of different kind of companies, small ones, big ones, whatever. That's my most consistent thing that pays my bills, basically. Second to that is probably tied between illustration for books and board games and etc., and online teaching with students. And then the tertiary thing that I do increasingly since 2018, I started fine art painting again. So painting like this one you see behind me right now. I love painting, so I kind of have recently been getting back to that, also as a way to kind of get away from the screens, because I'm doing a lot of digital artwork too. So basically, like the spread of what I've done to make a living as an artist is it's kept me fairly divided, I guess. I've worn a lot of different hats, and a lot of the time that a lot of makers especially have to do is wear their business hat and their sort of accounting and applying to markets, applying to events, applying for grants, those kind of things, and that takes a whole bunch of time as well. So one of the things that I think about with a universal basic income is just allowing artists to spend more time on the thing that perhaps isn't immediately financially viable, or can't support them in the short run, but may eventually, in the long run, if they're able to actually invest a significant amount of time into developing it. So for me, for example, that's painting, because I'm not really able to put enough time towards painting to develop, to create enough paintings basically in a year, and to also have time to apply to art markets and galleries and different shows and things like that. I find it's very difficult, maybe just for me, but I'm pretty sure others experience this too. It's difficult to put enough time towards the outreach and even just doing paintings, because again, most of my time is doing illustration teaching or animating. So the spread isn't quite as equal as I would like it in terms of how it's spread out. I like doing a variety of different things, but I would really like to develop my painting a little bit more. And I think having a universal basic income would allow me to make that more of a priority. And then basically like a small business startup, it would give me some upfront investment so that I could actually spend more time doing this and get better and better and better, and then actually hope to make a decent chunk of my income just from painting alone. So I think that's really great. And I think also something that is worth thinking about for artists in particular, although this applies to many different fields for sure, but I'm speaking directly to artists in this video. I think having a universal basic income would make you, even in the way that you approach your art or your music or your sculpture, anything like that, regardless of what your artistic discipline is that it would allow people to explore subjects that are more personal and less with a market kind of minded intent towards it. So sometimes, for me in particular, I paint a wide range of subjects, mostly landscapes, and I love doing that. But a lot of the time, even if it's subtle and in the back of my mind, I'm kind of thinking, is this sellable? Is this something that other people would like and that that somebody would actually want to purchase? And I think that that thought, that sort of little market-minded thought in the back of our mind, many financial folks and economists in particular would argue that the market forces us to consider what is desired, I guess, and the kind of work, and that should inform the kind of work that we're making. And I really disagree with that. I think we need to sort of see a more diverse range of artistic output. And I mean, contemporary artists are already there in some ways, right? They've almost forgotten enough. Well, this is a stereotype, but a lot of them they're purely going for the message and for the artistic potency or the political potency or whatever, and kind of not even worrying about the sellability of it. I'm not that way. I'm a little bit more pragmatic and practical. I would like to make a living from my art, and I would love to sell my paintings, and I don't want to have to depend on things like grants and things like that. So selling paintings for me is actually really important. But if there is less of a pressure to squeeze my subject matter into a refined form so that it can be sellable to people, I just think en masse we would see a lot more interesting art. It wouldn't pressure us to think so much about what someone might buy, or maybe I'll increase the color vibrancy so that it's a little more appealing to the average. That kind of thought. I think it wouldn't force us to do that. So I think that's a small little way that having universal basic income would make us just be a little bit riskier in our approach, and not worry so much about sort of constantly appeasing some kind of nebulous market that we don't really know about anyways, and we don't really, especially I find artists are very myopic sometimes when you get really into your own work and you're not necessarily aware of even what is desirable. So it's almost a false hope to begin with. But to some degree, I know landscapes in particular, like they're relatively neutral, so people could want to hang them on their walls. But I guess having a basic income would free me to think beyond just what's sellable and allow me to think like what do I want to explore. So I think that's really valuable. I touched on this earlier, but another thing that I think would be really valuable is just like with any project, there's a threshold basically, or even a team. For in a musician's case, it might be, in the beginning you have to market yourself a significant amount to really get your music out there. But then once you've crossed a threshold and you've sort of made it, or whatever that means, where you have a team that is supporting you to continue to produce your music, that's infinitely more powerful. To have a band manager and somebody who's doing the booking, and you have like a whole team around you, and once you're at that level, then you can focus more on the music and I suppose all the other things, the interviews and things like that. But that threshold, there's a wide chasm between being in a place where you need to do so much legwork to promote yourself. And it's funny because everyone thinks that social media has helped this, and it sort of has, but then everyone else is also using it. So there's just a lot of competition and noise online too, which can also be very inhibiting from artistically to even kind of start it. At least that's what I've found. I don't particularly mesh with social media a lot of the time, so I find it's especially hard to spend the effort to promote. But yeah, so there's this stage of early promoting, trying to get known, trying to become who the musician you want to be, and then eventually if you get picked up by a label or then you have more people backing you. But sometimes you can't get past that first threshold because there's the financial barrier, of course, of having to actually make a living from it. And that is, I would think, most of the time is what kind of stops the train before it starts, sort of, is that people are like, well, I need to make a living from this, or I need to make a living, period, and music I'll do on the side. That's what everyone says. I'll do this safe thing, and then I'll do the thing that I really want to do on the side. And I think having a basic income would really allow people to not settle as much for doing the safe thing. And because what it really ends up doing is that the thing that's safe is often tiring, or it uses up most of your energy, so you don't have as much steam to develop artistically the things that you want to. So it really takes, I talk to a lot of students' parents, for example, that are just applying to art schools, and a lot of them ask me like, can you make it in the arts? And it's like, yeah, but you kind of have to go all in, and that's inherently risky, right? Especially financially, especially if you don't have a lot of support, whether financially or even emotionally in your background, to allow you to have the right tools to kind of be successful in whatever way that makes sense to you. So it's not so easy to justify, I guess, spending all that time on the thing that's most personal and that you love the most, without knowing if it's going to actually pay out at any point. You don't know. We have no idea as artists, like how and when that's going to happen. Some think there's a lot of luck involved in that. I don't know what my opinion is of that. I don't even think about luck at all, and I just focus on the doing, which philosophically I think is the right thing to do. I just focus on like keep at it and not necessarily worry about the I guess extrinsic rewards as much as the intrinsic ones. I try to focus on the process and just continuing to deliver a steady amount of work, I guess, whether that's personal or professional or whatever. I just keep at it and don't worry if the success is going to happen or not. And so yeah, I think that threshold is an important thing that UBI, Universal Basic Income, could help bridge a little bit. It would allow the people that don't have either a whole bunch of financial support or support of resources or support of knowing the right people in the industry to allow them to succeed. It would allow them that extra buffer to spend extra time to develop their skills, to get better, to produce more music, to produce more tracks, to record some songs. In my case, maybe even start a graphic novel and self-publish it. It would just allow it a little bit more fair, a fair playing field, so that you don't necessarily need to have, all the right supports in place in the beginning before you start. It allow you that extra runway where you can develop your practice, whatever that is. Another thing that I'd like to talk about is some ideas as to what I would hope would result from many artists having a universal basic income, which would be some kind of sort of, I guess in the animation industry, animation in particular is an artistic medium that is best in a team. You can make a film by yourself, but it takes a long time, a lot of work and steady effort. And if, for example, if there are several animators that really didn't want to work for kids TV or feature film or whatever, they wanted to make their own work. They wanted to write their own scripts and make their own short films or documentaries or long form films, whatever. It would allow them to band together and use their basic income as sort of a way to create a sort of decentralized studio environment. So you could team up with other artists and basically just consider the universal basic income that you'd be getting every month as the part of your job that is your studio job that you form together. So say you get $1,000 a month. So everyone uses their $1,000 a month and tracks their hours and uses those hours to actually make a film project together. So that's really neat, right? Because then you have, you still need to make money from other things probably to make a living regularly, but you could use that amount that you're getting from universal basic income as like basically your imagined payment from some kind of employer that would be paying you to work on a short film together or something. So you could have these sort of artist-created, decentralized co-ops, perhaps, that could team up and work on projects together. So you're not just doing, a personal project on your own, but you're reaching out with other artists and kind of working on a larger scale project together. And the neat thing about that, in my opinion, is that it would allow Canada in particular to start to develop their own animation industry. We have a great animation school here, Sheridan College in Oakville, and there's so many grads coming out every year that often go to Toronto to work in kids TV or go to LA to do kids TV, Netflix, or feature film or games or things like that. So it's very reliant upon those larger players, and it you have a much more specialized role in the production. So if that's what you like, then that's great. But a lot of people, I think, would love to make their own projects. They would love to make their own film idea. So I think a universal basic income could sort of be a supplementary way to do that, which would be really neat to see. So we might actually see a lot more independent content being created in Canada that isn't so reliant on any kind of outside funding, which would be really neat. Now, I also want to talk about, obviously even thinking about the idea of pursuing your own artistic craft has an inherent sort of privilege baked into it, in that, so many people are working in factories and warehouses and doing jobs that, they would love to be doing their own thing or have the resources to pursue their own craft. And I'm not sure what the solution is to that, honestly. I'm making this video strictly for artists and creatives that are sort of, or makers that are sort of always feeling a little bit stuck in between, doing the thing that they know can make them money versus doing the thing they really love. And obviously it's not always that black and white. It isn't for me. I really like each of the things that I do, but I would love to do a lot more actual painting. So that's what sort of prompted this idea to imagine how things could be if our economic system was a little different. So one of the things I also wanted to discuss was that there's a lot of goods, in my opinion, especially for creative people, that a universal basic income could provide. Some of the bads, in my opinion, are that you would have a lot more people trying to participate. So, for a musician, for example, if if everyone was getting a certain amount per month, then you'd have a lot more people that would probably ditch their job and really try to double down on being a musician, or artist or whatever. You'd have a lot more people entering the creative sphere because, of course, it's to a lot of people that's more desirable. Even if you're getting lower pay, it's something that perhaps is more fulfilling. Not always. Obviously, people love their jobs in all kinds of different industries, but so there's that barrier. And obviously, with social media, some people are sort of inherently better at it than others. So you'd have even more competition than there is currently to be heard. So that would be tricky. That would be something to have to work out. Like, how do you, especially even here in Guelph where I live, every year there's the Guelph Art in the Street. And that's a 1-day event where there's everyone. It's an outdoor art market. So you have a tent, and I display my paintings in that tent. And if there was 1,000 more visual artists in this city suddenly, then that would really increase the competition. But ideally, things would scale a little bit. So you'd have maybe more art events. There might actually be more, not just art in the street, but there'd be other art markets, perhaps art markets all the time. But then again, then you're pulling back the people might not be as into purchasing as much, and so there's definitely some complexity there where seeing 300 of something almost like is overwhelming. So it might make people not want to participate as much in the artistic industry. So anyways, that's some of my ideas about universal basic income. I would love to hear from you about your ideas too.